Hey everyone, in this video we're going to take a look at chapter 42 from book 5 of Caesar's De Bello Gallico. So remember, we're in the middle of the Gallic Wars right around 54 BC, and we're dealing with the attack on Cicero's camp. So just to pick up the narrative of again, the camp of Sabinus and Cotta, right, in the land of the Eburones has already been wiped out, right? The Nervi have come to the camp of Cicero. They're trying to do the exact same trick that they did on Sabinus and Cotta, which led to the ambush and kind of the annihilation of those Romans. So at this point, the Nervi have tried that trick of saying, hey, we're friends, come on out. Like, don't worry about it. Let's have a peace talk, right? So they've surrounded the fort. They're trying to get the Romans to come out. The Romans have been fighting them off under Cicero for a few days. The men are tired. There's not really any time for rest. Even those who are injured are still fighting. So it's kind of a desperate situation that the Romans find themselves in, okay? Now, before we dive too far into it, like I always tell you, the first thing you want to do if you're trying to read this on your own is make sure you know the vocab. So find a vocab list. There's a bunch out there. You could probably Google it pretty quickly and find a Quizlet. Just work your way through the vocab, just because it's really hard to understand what's happening if you don't know what the words mean. So always start there. And then the other thing I would recommend you do is read this story aloud. You've heard me say this in all these videos, but if you can take some time or find some time to read it aloud, read it to a classmate, have them read it back to you. You never want to shut off your speaking, your pronunciation when you're doing the reading, or your listening skills when your classmate or whoever is reading it back to you. Those are really important for bringing the language to life. So you don't want to just read this in your head, okay? The other thing that I would encourage you to do, if you can find the time or make the time, is do the read and reread method. So when it comes time to actually translating this, read through the chapter all the way, start to finish, right? Write down any problem areas you have. And when you're done, try to look up where you're going wrong. If it's vocab, that's really easy. Just look up the word. Again, you could probably find it on a Quizlet, or a good commentary will guide you through if it's kind of like an idiom or a phrase you're not entirely sure of. And then for the grammar, again, turn to a commentary. There's a lot of really good ones out there. They'll help you through the grammar. Maybe it's something you just didn't catch, or like I said, an idiom or a phrase you're not used to, or you can look it up on your own, right? Maybe it's a verb form and you just look it up real quick. You're like, oh, got it. It was subjunctive, or whatever it might be. You try to shore up all the problem areas you have, and you repeat that process. Now, you've heard me say a lot of times Caesar is really only read for AP, and there's a crunch. There's not a lot of time. There's a ton of things to read. I get it. But if you're starting with Caesar and you're reading this early on in the year, it's very difficult to remember it when it comes time for the test in May, right? Maybe you're reading this in October. So doing this read and reread method lets you read it a few times. That'll help you lock it into your long-term memory, right? That way, when it comes time for the AP test, you actually have a chance of remembering what's going on, because there's just way too much material. You're never going to be able to study everything for that test. And like I said, most of the time people reading these sections of Caesar, it's really for the AP curriculum. Okay, so if you haven't done that yet, I'd highly encourage you to pause the video, go back and do it. But for the rest of the video, I'll walk you through it, and we'll try to unpack what's going on in chapter 42. Okay, so chapter 42 starts like this. You have ab hac spe, repulsi nervi valo pedum, and then you have ix, right, the number 9, et fossa pedum xv, which is 15, hiberna cingunt. Okay, so we're starting with the Nervii, right? Remember, they're the Gauls who have surrounded Cicero's camp. You have the Nervii having been repulsed or repelled, repulsi, right? You have the perfect passive participle. It's describing the Nervii. So the Nervii repulsed from this hope. Now, the hope is the hope that they'd be able to trick the Romans, right? So they're kind of driven back or persuaded against this hope, right? This hope is gone. They know now that the Romans are not going to come out, that Cicero was too smart. Remember in chapter 41, he said, hey, if you want to have a talk, call for Caesar. He kind of called their bluff. Now they realize that this isn't going to work. So you have the Nervii, right, repulsed or repelled from this hope. They surround the winter quarters, so hiberna cingunt, right? They surround the hiberna, right, the camp. And they surround it with a wallo, which is like a rampart or a wall, of 9 feet, right, pedum ix rather. So they put a 9-foot tall wall around it, and a fossa, right? A fossa is a ditch. If any of you are Ecce Romani fans, you'll recognize that right away. But a ditch of 15 feet. So you have pedum xv. So again, once they realize that this is going to be a fight, they besiege the camp, right? But what they're doing here is really interesting. So building a wall and building a ditch is kind of interesting wording. The image you should get is something like this. And I forget exactly. I think I pulled this from Wikipedia. It's sort of a reconstruction of a siege. It might be Battle of Alesia, honestly. But the Romans were big into this siege tactic. So when the Romans built a fort, right, and I'm sure other people did it as well, you would build a sort of an earth wall to start. And on top of that, your wall would be made of wood, which we've seen in the description of Cicero's camp, right? They're not building stone forts when they're on the march, right? They're not building that permanent of a camp. But the reason you do this is because if you have a 9-foot wall, which the Nervii do, if you build a 15-foot ditch in front of it, now you just add them up, right? You have basically a 24-foot wall. So an attacking army would have to go down the ditch, and usually you would put spikes or something in the bottom to kind of trip them up or kill them, and then climb up the wall. And now you've been able to create a much higher wall without using any timber, any wood, right? So digging a ditch is a really good way of enhancing the size of the wall, and it doesn't really cost any materials. You're just moving earth. So that's what the Nervii have done. The Nervii have done here. But it's interesting because this is a Roman siege tactic, right? So we see Caesar do this all the time. So there's something happening here where Caesar's making a point of showing the Nervii have figured out siege tactics, right? Roman siege tactics, which is just kind of an interesting side note as they besiege the camp. Okay. Then you have haec et superiorum anorum consuetudine ab nobis cognoverant et quos clam de exercitu habebant captivos ab eis docebantur ... Okay, and now you're going to see that Caesar is going to explain in pretty good detail exactly how the Nervii know how to do this. So where you want to start is cognoverant, right? They had learned. It's talking about the Nervii. So it's saying they had learned, and you have et, right? So you have both and. So they had learned these things, haec is these things, both, right? From the consuetudine, from the custom or the practice of superiorum anorum, of previous years, right? So in other words, they've seen this happen to them before. And from ab nobis, from our soldiers or from our men. So Caesar's saying that that the Nervii, right, had learned these siege strategies from watching the Romans over all these years, right? So Caesar has been in Gaul for, call it 4 years at this point. They've seen what the Romans do. They've taken notes, and now they're going to use it against them, okay? So again, there's this interesting thing where it's sort of like the student kind of flipping on the master here, right? They've watched the masters and their siege tactics, and now the Nervii are showing, hey, we learned how to do this too. We're going to use the exact same tactics on you. So we go to docebantur, they were taught, right? So they learned these things from watching the Romans, and they were taught these things, right? Is kind of the idea. The haec is going with cognoverant and docebantur. So they were taught these things ab eis, from those, right? From those people. Now, it's a little odd. You have to kind of reverse the order and put ab eis in front of quos, right? To make it the antecedent. So it's an interesting kind of wordplay here. From Caesar, right? But he's saying that they were taught these things from those whom, quos, right, talking about those people, whom secretly from the army, de exercitu, they held as captives, habebant captivos. So in other words, the Nervii have taken Roman captives, right, from the army, and they've learned these tricks from the captives they have, right? So the Romans have kind of taught them. And now the line continues, and you have said nulla feramentorum copia quae esset ad hunc usum idonea gladiis caespites circumcidere manibus sagulisque terram exhaurire videbantur. Okay, so you have but with nulla copia, with no supply of feramentorum, of like iron tools, I guess you could say. They don't have any iron tools with them, right? So they're trying, and this is talking about the the Nervii, right? So since, you can almost say that it's since is probably a better way to do it. So since there was no supply of iron tools, right, which was for this use, ad hunc usum idonea, which was suitable for this use. So in other words, since they didn't have any iron tools to dig these trenches, which really is what they needed, right? Quae esset idonea, rather, which was suitable for this use. They, videbantur, they seem to circumcidere, to cut around, right? The caespites are like chunks of earth. Turf is kind of how you see it in commentaries, with their gladies, with their swords. So since they don't have iron tools, they're using swords to cut away the ground, right? The turf. And then we come back to videbantur. So again, it's not just cutting out the ground or the turf, but we come back to videbantur. They seem to exhaurire. You could almost say like excavate is kind of how you see it in commentaries. It's probably the way to make it, make the most sense. Again, it's like digging things out. But they're digging out the terram, the earth, with their hands, manibus, and with their sagulis, with their cloaks. So the image you want to get here is that the Nervii are digging with their swords, and they're kind of dragging. So again, cutting away away the turf would be like the grass, sod, whatever you want to do with that. So you have to cut out the grass first. Then you have to dig out the actual ground, and you do it with your cloak. You use your hands, you pile up the dirt on your cloak and drag your cloak away or carry it away. And it's kind of a makeshift way of digging out these siege lines, right? Digging the ditch and building up the wall when they don't have the proper tools for it. Okay? And then we get the last part here to finish out the chapter. You have quaquidem ex re hominum multitudo cognosci potuit. Nam minus horis tribus milium pedum, you have XV, 15, in circuitu munitionem perfecerunt reliquisque diebus tures ad altitudinem vali falces testudinesque quas idem captivi docuerant parare ad ac facere coiperant. Okay, so you start with qua re, right? Qua ex re. So indeed, quidem, right? Indeed, from this thing, this situation, right? Re, however you want to translate that, this affair, but it's talking about the siege. So from this situation, I guess, the multitudo, the crowd of men, hominum multitudo, the size of the men was able to be known, cognosci potuit. So in other words, because the Romans can see how many men are working on this, now they know exactly how many Nervii are surrounding them, and Cicero's probably glad that he didn't walk outside, right? And you can see here you have for in less than, right, minus, in less than 3 hours, right? In less than 3 hours, they perfecerunt, they completed the fortification. So they did this really quickly. They complete the fortification, and it's described as being milium pedum, right, of thousands of feet, literally. XV is 15, so of 15,000 feet in circuitu, right, in circumference. So this giant ring of a wall and the ditch, it's apparently 15,000 feet around, and they do it in less than 3 hours, which is kind of wild when you think about it. So once they have the wall up, right, so the wall took it took 3 hours, less than 3 hours. Then you have reliquisque diebus. So in the remaining days, right after that first kind of initial thing, and you have a couple of direct objects here. So the verb you really want to go to is at the end. You have coiperant. They began to parare ac facere, to prepare and to make. So they start doing a couple of different things. So they they began to prepare and make tures, which are towers, ad altitudinem vali, to the height of the wall, right? So they're building up towers to get into the Roman wall. And they're also building falces testudinesque, grappling hooks. And testudines here is usually like testudos, right? The tortoise, that famous shield formation. In a siege, it's probably talking about like large shields. So the idea is you would build like this wicker shield or whatever it's made out of, and you can hide behind it as you assault a wall. And this way you're not getting shot, in the face with an arrow. So they're getting grappling hooks, which you would throw up to climb the wall or rip the wall down, whatever it might be. And they're getting the shields, right? So this is all things you would use to assault a position, right? So how do they know this? Again, they prepare these things, which, quas, right? The idea of all the towers, the falces, the testudines, all these things which the same captives, docuera, had taught them, right? So now, because they have these Roman captives who are kind of giving away the secrets of how you bring down a Roman fort, right? Now the Nervii are turning all of this against them, and they're building towers and walls and preparing grappling hooks, and they're getting ready to besiege Cicero's camp, okay? So the Romans, again, are in a really kind of tough spot here. Now, that's all it is for chapter 42, pretty short, right, as we see the preparation for the siege. But there are some things you should think about, right? So you want to notice the difference in the attacks on the Romans, right? So now that the trick failed, you have a new trick being deployed by the Nervii. So with Ambiorix against Sabinus and Cotta, they actually came out of the fort and they were able to kill him. Now that didn't work, you can see how quickly they pivot to something different, which is interesting. It shows that the Nervii aren't just like the one-trick ponies. They had a backup plan. You wouldn't be able to all of a sudden do this without being prepared. And their backup plan is using Roman siege tactics against them. So they already had the captives, they already have this plan, and they start besieging a Roman fort. And again, if you were Cicero of the Romans, this would probably be a little shocking, seeing your own tactics used against you. You'd be like, oh no, we're in trouble here, right? And you want to notice how Caesar keeps emphasizing the role of the Romans, right, that they played in the Nervii siege. Is he kind of condemning them? Is he downplaying the intelligence of the Nervii? I think it's worth thinking about. I feel like it's a little of both. It almost comes off to me as Caesar saying, you know what, if you didn't have these captives who spilled all our secrets, to me it feels judgmental. You can put in the comments if you agree or disagree, but I feel like there's a little bit of like disdain from Caesar, saying, I can't believe these people shared our siege tactics. What's wrong with you? But also a little bit of downplaying the nervy, saying, look at these barbarians, right? They don't know what they're doing. They could only do it because they had, our men showing them. I feel like, again, instead of giving credit to the nervy for learning something, Caesar's downplaying like these people. I can't even believe them, right? If they didn't have us, what would they be able to do? Nothing, right? So to me, it has that sort of bite behind the words he's using here. Okay, and lastly, the speed is on display. They're able to build a fortification in less than 3 hours. That's crazy, right? I tell you, that's incredibly impressive. And they've clearly absorbed Roman siege tactics really quickly. This is basically what Caesar would have done, right? His sort of calling card is his speed, and his sieges, his engineering, and now we're seeing it used against the Romans. It's just kind of interesting to think about, okay? But in terms of the plot, nothing too crazy. They're just preparing to besiege the Romans. So again, this is going to be different than what happened to Sabinus and Cotta, because Cicero won't come out of the fort. So the idea is, if you won't come out, we're going to come in and get you, and we're going to see how this all unfolds, okay? If you have any questions at all about the translation, comments, anything like that, put them in the comments below. I'm always happy to help or explain something better if I misspoke, whatever it might be. But hopefully this helps, right? Helps you be able to translate this chapter. And again, you want to try to lock this into your long-term memory. If you are an AP student, try to lock it in so you can remember it for the test, just because you have so much that you need to cover. So try to think about the strategies we talked about in the beginning of the video. If you're just reading this for fun, enjoy it, right? I always think it's great to read Latin for fun. I'm not necessarily worry about a test. So hopefully you're enjoying it. And again, if you need anything, let me know. But otherwise, just keep practicing it. The more you do it, the more you read through and kind of get used to Caesar and how he writes, the better off you're going to be. Good luck.